Okay, we are now going to look more in-depthly at the process of cellular respiration and break down the three parts of cellular respiration: glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. We are in section 9.2, if you are following along. So, as we talked about in the respiration overview, glucose, that if you're a plant, you made during photosynthesis. If you're a human, you obtained by eating food. This glucose is broken down through three processes: glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and electron transport chain. And if there's oxygen present, this will happen. It will go through glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and electron transport chain with oxygen. That's an aerobic process. If oxygen is not present, glycolysis will take place, but it will lead to fermentation. And this is where alcohol is created or lactic acid. Now, sometimes this is good. We want things to ferment and make alcohol or lactic acid. Lactic acid is important in the manufacturing of things like cheese and yogurts and ice cream. But in your body, fermentation is a bad thing. So glycolysis is always taking place, even without oxygen. With oxygen, it will lead to the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. Without oxygen, it will lead to fermentation, which is the production of alcohol or lactic acid. So glycolysis, the first step is releasing the energy of glucose. It is the one pathway, the one process that is found in absolutely all living things. So this one molecule of glucose, a 6-carbon glucose molecule, is transformed into 2 molecules of pyruvic acid, and pyruvic acid is a 3-carbon compound. So you take glucose and you break it apart into 2 molecules of pyruvic acid. The cell uses 2 ATP molecules to do that, but it also produces 4 ATP molecules during glycolysis, so there's a net gain of 2 ATP molecules during glycolysis. So in glycolysis, you have the 6-carbon glucose, which is broken down into 2 3-carbon pyruvic acids. There is energy used and energy produced, and there is high energy electrons created, which are handled by the oven mitt, the NAD, which accepts those high energy electrons and carries them as NADH. This is a very quick, a very fast process in an organism. It does not require any oxygen. So glycolysis starts with glucose and 2 ATP to provide the energy that breaks the glucose down into pyruvic acid, 4 ATP, and electrons that are being transported by the NADH. So after the quick glycolysis reaction, still about 90% of the energy is unused. So now the products from glycolysis, the pyruvic acid, the 4 ATP, and the high energy electrons enter into the Krebs cycle. The most powerful electron acceptor is oxygen. So in order for the next part of respiration to take place, oxygen must be present. This is an aerobic process. From here on out, the Krebs cycle and the electron transport cannot happen without oxygen because they are needed to receive those high energy electrons. So in the Krebs cycle, which is what happens next, we're now in the mitochondria. So the pyruvic acid that was made in the cytoplasm during glycolysis now enters into the mitochondria. And the pyruvic acid is broken down into carbon dioxide in a series of energy extracting reactions. And this is actually called the citric acid cycle, because citric acid is the first compound that's formed, so we sometimes refer to this as the citric acid cycle. So the pyruvic acid will enter into the mitochondria, where it will be broken down into carbon dioxide, which is a waste product, which is why we breathe out carbon dioxide, as well as citric acid. So you see here the pyruvic acid enters, and it is broken down into carbon dioxide. So you see here where the pyruvic acid is making citric acid. So in the Krebs cycle, you have the citric acid portion, and then you have the major energy extraction portion coming up next. And again, this is all taking place in the mitochondria. So the pyruvic acid enters the matrix, which is the mitochondria. One carbon becomes carbon dioxide, and the other two carbons rearrange to form acetic acid. And acetic acid will then form with coenzyme A to form acetyl-CoA. And the acetyl-CoA will add 2 carbons to a 4-carbon molecule to produce a 6-carbon molecule citric acid. So essentially what I want you to know here is that the pyruvic acid, which is a 3-carbon molecule, will break down into 1 carbon that will turn into carbon dioxide, and the other 2 carbons will rearrange to form acetic acid that will then turn into citric acid at this point. Citric acid is broken down into a 4-carbon molecule, and more carbon dioxide is released. The electrons are transferred to the electron carriers. These are the oven mitts, NAD and FAD. Those are the oven mitts. And 1 more ATP is generated. So from that 1 molecule of pyruvic acid, you're going to get 4 NADH, electron carrier, 1 FADH2, an electron carrier, and 1 ATP. So Krebs cycle products, carbon dioxide is released when you breathe out. That's why we breathe out carbon dioxide. ATP is produced for cellular activities, and high energy electrons are used to generate large amounts of ATP in the electron transport chain. So these electrons are being transferred by the NADH, the oven mitt, and the FADH, the other oven mitt, to the electron transport chain, where very high amounts of ATP are going to be created. Electron transport will use the high energy electrons from the Krebs cycle to convert ADP into ATP. So in eukaryotes, this happens in the mitochondria. In prokaryotes, since they don't have a mitochondria, this happens in the cell membrane. But eukaryotes, it happens in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. So here is your electron transport chain. So in come the electrons from the Krebs cycle, carried by the NADH and the FADH, that bring them in. And then, because it's a chain, they're going to travel down the chain. So the high energy electrons are passed down the chain from carrier to carrier. The blue things you see there are the carriers. Water is formed because oxygen accepts the electrons in combination with the hydrogen ions for water production, which you see here. Energy that is generated by the electron transport chain is used to move hydrogen ions across the membrane. So hydrogen ions will be pumping out, in and out, across the membrane. They will again rotate the ATP synthase, and that is where ATP is generated, where the large production of ATP is. So high energy electrons are passed into the electron transport chain, and they came from the Krebs cycle. They came from the Krebs cycle by way of NADH and FADH2. An enzyme at the end combines the electrons with hydrogen and oxygen to form water, and oxygen serves as the final electron acceptor. Energy from high energy electrons will transport hydrogen across the membrane, creating that concentration gradient. The hydrogen escapes through channels into proteins. The ATP synthase will spin, and each rotation grabs an ADP and attaches a phosphate, making ATP. On the average, every electron that moves down the chain will create enough energy to convert 3 ADP into 3 ATP. So glycolysis will generate a net gain of 2 ATP, while respiration will produce 34 ATP per glucose molecule. So for a grand total of 36 molecules of ATP are produced for every molecule of glucose. Water and carbon dioxide are your waste products. Cellular respiration uses about 36% of the total energy of glucose. The rest of it is released as heat from your body. Okay. Your body radiates off a great deal of heat, and that is coming from the glucose that is not used to generate energy in cellular respiration. So the entire process here, you start out with glycolysis. You've got glucose and oxygen that enter your body. So you have glucose from your food and oxygen that you eat enter your body and go quickly through the glycolysis process, which makes pyruvic acid. The pyruvic acid then goes through the Krebs cycle, and the Krebs cycle will generate some more high energy electrons carried by NADH and FADH2. It also creates citric acid during the Krebs cycle. Then during the electron transport chain, electrons are transported down the inner membrane of the mitochondria. They are passed down from carrier to carrier, where water is created and carbon dioxide is created, along with 34 more ATP molecules. And the waste products of carbon dioxide and water are the waste products that we breathe out in the end. So the entire process involves 3 major things: glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain.